Bonjour and welcome to La French Connexion Calgary. I'm Suzanne de Courville-Nicole, and I'm here in an exciting conversation with Mr. Tim Marriott, who's the president of the Historical Society of Alberta. We are at La Chaumière restaurant, located in the heart of Calgary's historic French Quarter. Known as Rouleauville from 1899 to 1907, it is the cradle of Calgary. What a pleasure to welcome you, Tim, Mr. Alberta History himself.
Thank you. There are others who deserve it more than I, but thank you.
You're too humble. So, you are quite an amazing man. As I'm reading about you, you've been the theater, president of the theater associations. I'll let you the Street Performers Festival, but right now you are also the protocol person with the government of Alberta, if I understood correctly.
Yes, that's right. So an ambassador accredited to Canada, when they want to make their official visit to Alberta, they call my office and we set up their chance to meet the government.
Ah, well, that's so important because Alberta is a very welcoming province, and to have the liaison with that and the diplomatic side of things is so important. My goodness, yes.
Yes, and all the diplomats make note of both the business opportunities in Alberta and for Albertans in their countries, but also the cultural affinities and connections. And they're very keen on finding such vibrant communities in Alberta from their home countries.
Yes, yeah. So it's probably always a surprise, or a bit of a surprise, when people come to visit Alberta to see that diversity. Tell us about your interest in history, though, and what led you to becoming president of the Historical Society of Alberta.
Well, if you'll permit me, I'll go back to when I was a little boy. My father was a dentist and had a practice in Northern Alberta in a town called Bonnyville. Right. And so we had a place on a lake called Moose Lake. And from the time I was old enough to start remembering things, I remember him telling me that there had once been a fur trade fort on our lake, Moose Lake, except its original name was Lac d'Orignal.
Ah, yes.
And that there was a Northwest Company fort on the North Shore somewhere, but nobody had ever quite found out exactly where it was. And so, like all young people, you get excited by the little touch of mystery that's part of a good story. And so ever since then, I've been trying to discover more about Alberta with everything I do, because we live in a fascinating place. And every time you learn something new, you discover there are many more things you want to find out about as well. Mm-hmm. I don't believe anyone's ever found where that fort was precisely on the north shore of the lake, but I hope someday to discover that myself.
Oh, well, a challenge. Let's find out.
Yeah.
Follow that. If anybody can find out, I think you can.
So history has always been part of my life. My father had a very strong interest in it. My mother's parents were homesteaders in Alberta in the very early days, and certainly the idea of them coming to a country where they established themselves in a new place, in a new way. They were from New Brunswick, actually.
Oh,
and
good people.
That was, absolutely. But that was also part of the idea, is that this is a place where you can let yourself become the person you want to be.
I believe you offer presentations to the public with your involvement with Fort Edmonton?
Yes, that's right. So I was very fortunate when I left university, or when I completed university, to happen to see an ad for summer work at Fort Edmonton Park, which is a living history museum in Edmonton, and in those days was in its very beginning days. This is in the middle 1970s. To their great surprise, I think, they hired me to work there, and I have to say it was the most wonderful summer job, which then became my permanent job for 20 odd years.
Really?
And that's exactly what it was. It was that presentation of the history And as the park grew, the history that we embraced grew, and our ability to tell the stories and the different ways we could tell the stories grew along with the park. So within Fort Edmonton Park, we would do historical interpretation, which is the telling the stories, talking to each other. We also used theatrical presentations as a way of telling particular stories. We used reenactments. We set up situations where the visitors could become involved in the story themselves. And that brings us to what is the key part of historical interpretation, and I'm sure you know, is that it's really about getting people to talk about themselves, and so that they are contributing to the story. And that there's nothing more satisfying in the world than to talk to people literally from all over the world, visiting a place like Fort Edmonton Park, discovering Alberta history, and then making the connections to their own. It's a marvelous job, and I'm so grateful that that lucky accident the day that I saw the job posted, and as I say, it turned into 3 decades worth of my life.
Oh my goodness. And so while you were doing that, and I believe you still offer presentations now, do you not?
Yes, I'm still involved with Fort Edmonton Park in a different way after I moved on to
Yes.
protocol job.
Protocol, yes.
But I've always had derived a great deal of pleasure from talking to people about Edmonton's history, Alberta's history. And so a friend of mine and I have continued to offer guided tours of Edmonton's historic neighborhoods. I take tours through Edmonton's historic cemeteries in conjunction with things like the Edmonton Historical Board, and also on my own and with my friend, we do these presentations. We're actually working on a tour right now where we're developing a new tour about Edmonton's oldest neighborhood, which is down on the River Flats, just below downtown, where Edmonton as a community actually began back in the middle of the 19th century.
Oh my good. And so, and of course, with the French connection of things, as you offer the presentations, I'm curious to know, are people surprised to learn about the French history of things?
Yes, people are surprised, but I think in a very positive, pleasant way, to discover that Alberta's Francophone roots go very, very deep. If you don't know, if you're not exposed to it day to day, you just assume that it isn't there because you look around and you don't see it. I'll tell you a story though from the other side. And when I grew up in Bonnyville the first few years of my life. When we moved back to Edmonton, my father's hometown, I remember asking them, do people speak English on the streets in Edmonton? Because in Bonnyville, of course, they spoke French in those days. So it is what you're exposed to that makes you have that perspective that you can take to your new place.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, there's a large footprint of Francophones, as we keep coming back to that. And certainly one fascinating story is that of Father Léon Doucette.
Yes, and this is the latest volume. This is a wonderful book in a long-standing series that the Historical Society of Alberta has put out with the Alberta Records Publication Board. And so this is actually the 21st book, so you can say we've reached our maturity with this volume, which is about Father Léon Doucette, or rather, these are his notes from when he was a missionary priest in Alberta, starting in the 1860s, and he was active as a priest in Alberta till 1939. So a very huge swath of Alberta's history are contained in the notes that Father Doucette kept, tried to turn into a journal in his older age, and which has very wonderfully been edited and now presented in both English and French by the editors who have produced this wonderful volume. This is literally just off the shelf.
I know.
Just off the press, rather.
I'm very excited to have you here to talk about it.
Fly off the shelves. This, back to your point about discovering the Franco roots of Alberta, this demonstrates, shows without doubt how present the French fact was in southern Alberta even before there was anything called Alberta.
Yes.
The missionaries, the mounted police, as we move along in history, the French fact is always there, and very much so in Calgary, as you've already noted about Rouleauville. Mm-hmm. The other wonderful thing about this book is, as you read Father Doucette's memoirs, within 10 pages, you've taken all over the province, from Rocky Mountain House, or Le Fort de Montagne, Jasper, Edmonton, Notre-Dame-de-Pays, Calgary, yes, to Saint-Paul-de-Crie or Saint-Paul-de-Métis, into Northern Alberta, into the far reaches of Northern Alberta, and right to the very edge of Alberta along Montana's border. Father Doucette was everywhere. Typical of his generation, self-effacing, not at all self-aggrandizing, but the notes that he made are spectacularly interesting, and I guarantee that anyone who reads this book, every 10 pages, they gain a new insight, or they learn something new about Alberta. The volume of Father Doucette's journal is part of a series, and the Alberta Records Publication Board has, as I said, published 21 volumes over the course of the years. The series began in 1977, and what they are original sources, source material, which would otherwise be in archives accessible only to people who know of their existence and have the ability to go to that archives and look at the original sources there in the archives reading room. The purpose of this series of publications is to bring these sources out from the archives and be able to share them with not only academics and students, but also the general interested public. And this is why the Father Doucette journal is so important, because it is part of that long-standing tradition in this series to publish these people's journals and memoirs. So the very first volume was Father Robert Rundle, the Methodist missionary in the 1840s, his journals from when he established missions near Edmonton, near modern-day Edmonton at Pigeon Lake, up at Lac-La-Biche, down at Banff, in the Morley area. So there is a wonderful ability now for anyone in Alberta, anyone in Canada, to be able to consult volumes that at one time were fairly inaccessible. And so in the series you have a number of things, early settlers' memoirs, a collection of documents on the formation of Alberta, letters that politicians wrote to each other talking about what kind of province, how big a province, that sort of thing. All of these things now are available to anyone who's interested, and I guarantee you, as you read the books, the person who was not interested or thought he wasn't interested will discover that he is, and that this stuff is vital. I brought this one along. This is the 2 volumes ago. This is the Fort Edmonton, or the Edmonton House journals, which were published between 1806 and 1821. The various fur trade forts in the Hudson's Bay Company territories were required to keep journals of their daily activities. And the Fort Edmonton journals have not been available outside of the Hudson's Bay archives hitherto. There were one set of journals published more than 30 years ago, and so the Alberta Records Publication Board has produced the Edmonton House journals, 2 volumes of the journals which had not been published before, and there is a possibility of doing the 3rd journal, which will complete the series. These journals are, again, daily life, and that is the great advantage of being able to consult primary sources, is you get the original writing, the day-to-day occurrences, so you get a sense of the whole existence rather than someone's particular point of view on a particular subject.
Because it was such a network of all different religions, of course, the priests and père colonisateurs from overseas and from different parts of Canada, and they were all working towards the same goal. the evangelization of First Nations people and who were here, of course, in the beginning. So.
And Suzanne, that's a very apt comment, which ties in directly to the volume about from Father Doucette, is because he talks about his mission ambulante, where he goes out and he lives with the First Nations people.
Yes.
And what this memoir demonstrates, and what other historians have noted from other sources, is that the relationship between the missionaries and the First Nations was not one of someone saying, here's what you should do, but rather it was a mutually beneficial exchange of ideas, of culture, of insights.
Yes.
And this is what you'll see in what Father Doucette writes. This is what you'll discover is I think how we're understanding history today, that it's a conversation among people, yes, not a monologue by anyone. And Father Doucette, this volume, people will discover that that is right there at the origins of Alberta as we understand it today.
Wonderful. Well, Tim Marriott, President of the Historical Society of Alberta, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you very much, and merci for sharing your time and knowledge and expertise with us.
Merci.
Ça me fait plaisir.